In 1991, a house fire killed 3 young children. By 2004, their father was executed for starting it. But here's what makes this story different. Years later, fire science would change, and experts would begin asking a question no one wanted to hear. What if the fire was never arson? What if the evidence that sent a man to death row was never evidence at all? On December 23, 1991, in Corsicana, Texas, a small home caught fire. Inside were 3 children, 2-year-old Amber and 1-year-old twins, Carmen and Cameron. They did not survive. Their father, Cameron Todd Willingham, escaped the burning house with minor injuries. In the immediate aftermath, grief and suspicion collided. Witnesses described Willingham's behavior as unusual. They said he didn't rush back inside repeatedly. They said he seemed detached. And in tragedy, behavior often becomes evidence. But behavior is subjective. Fire patterns are not. Or at least, they weren't supposed to be. Investigators examined the charred remains of the home. They identified what they believed were clear indicators of arson: poor patterns on the floor, crazed glass in the windows, low burn marks, multiple points of origin. To them, these signs meant one thing: accelerant, intent, murder. Within days, the fire was ruled arson. Within months, Willingham was charged with capital murder. And the narrative hardened quickly. A troubled father, financial stress, a house fire. The theory was simple, too simple. At trial, the prosecution relied heavily on fire investigators' testimony. Jurors were told the burn patterns proved liquid accelerant had been poured across the floor. They were told the fire moved unnaturally fast. They were told the physical evidence was conclusive. No sophisticated lab analysis supported these claims. No chemical accelerant was definitively identified. But in the early 1990s, arson investigation relied heavily on experience and visual interpretation. And experience can be flawed. Willingham was convicted. In 1992, he was sentenced to death. The case appeared closed. But here's the twist. Even before his execution in 2004, a nationally recognized fire scientist reviewed the case. Dr. Gerald Hurst examined the reports. He concluded the fire showed no reliable indicators of arson. He argued the patterns described as poor marks were consistent with flashover, a phenomenon where a room becomes so hot that everything ignites simultaneously. In flashover, burn patterns can mimic accelerant use. The very signs investigators relied on might have been misunderstood. Hurst submitted his findings to the state before the execution. They were not meaningfully acted upon. On February 17, 2004, Cameron Todd Willingham was executed by lethal injection. He maintained his innocence until the end. Years passed, and fire science evolved. Research conducted in the late 1990s and early 2000s began dismantling many long-held arson myths. Crazed glass, not proof of accelerant, often caused by rapid cooling. Low burn patterns can result from flashover. Multiple points of origin, sometimes an illusion created by ventilation and structural collapse. The problem wasn't malicious intent. It was outdated science. And outdated science had consequences. By 2009, the Texas Forensic Science Commission began reviewing the case. Independent experts examined the original findings. They found no credible scientific basis for the arson conclusion. The indicators used in 1991 had largely been discredited by modern standards, which raises a haunting possibility. If the fire was accidental, then 3 children died in a tragic accident, and their father was executed for a crime that may never have occurred. Here's the retention twist that makes this case chilling. There was no hidden DNA, no new suspect, no late confession. The new evidence was not new at all. It was better understanding. The physical evidence never changed. Only the science interpreting it did, which means the truth may have always been there. Misread. The debate continues. Some maintain Willingham was guilty. Others argue the case represents one of the most troubling forensic failures in modern American history. But what cannot be ignored is this. Every major independent fire expert who reviewed the case years later concluded the arson determination was scientifically unsound. That doesn't automatically prove innocence, but it does destabilize certainty. And in death penalty cases, certainty is everything. There's another psychological layer here. In catastrophic fires involving children, the emotional gravity is immense. Investigators search for meaning. Communities demand accountability. Random accidents feel unbearable. Intent feels easier to process. A villain provides structure to grief. An accident does not. And once a narrative forms, it can be difficult to retreat, even when science shifts beneath it. This case forced a broader reckoning. How many convictions relied on outdated forensic techniques? How many experts testified with confidence in methods later revised? Fire investigation manuals were rewritten. Training standards improved. But reform does not rewind time. Cameron Todd Willingham was executed under the legal standard of his era, but history may judge the science differently. There's one final detail. Before his execution, Willingham reportedly said, "I am an innocent man." Many convicted individuals claim innocence, but very few cases later reveal that the underlying science itself was flawed. This case didn't hinge on a liar. It may have hinged on a misunderstanding, and that distinction matters. Because if evidence is misinterpreted, justice can become irreversible. 3 children lost their lives in 1991. A father lost his life in 2004. And decades later, the fire still burns in legal debate. This is not just a story about guilt or innocence. It's about the evolution of knowledge, about how certainty can be constructed, and about what happens when science moves forward after the verdict is already carried out. The evidence didn't disappear. It didn't degrade. It didn't hide. It was studied again, under new light, and it told a different story. Or perhaps it told the same story, more clearly. This has been Chronicles of Clues. Sometimes, it was just misunderstood.